How are you, my friends? Excellent, excellent. I'd like to start by thanking all the organizers for making this possible. I think it's lovely, all these things that happen behind the scenes, and we finally get the fruit of the labor to hear us talk. I hope it's good, and I hope it's fun. Thanks to Axel Mueller for sharing the stage with us. It's a joy. I'm looking forward to hearing more of what he has to say. And to me, a special thanks to President Schapiro. As was mentioned, Morton Schapiro was the president at Williams before he came here to be the president. And in fact, he's the one who sort of signed the form that gave me a job that I have today. So it's great. It's great. And thank you guys for taking the time to come here. It's lovely to see all these people. So we're here to talk about these big questions, right? These big questions and what it means in the university setting, in a secular university, about God with a capital G, faith with a capital F. What does all this stuff mean? And some of these big questions you might have heard before in class. You might have struggled with yourself, talked about in parents and synagogue and churches. What is the meaning of life? What does truth with a capital T mean? Is that actually possible? Is there a God? Can we actually know that there is a God? And to me, most importantly, why are infinity scarves so popular? Isn't it just a scarf? Whatever. And today we're here to talk about these big ideas about truth, about faith, about reality. Now, the problem is everybody has our own perspective on what is true, on what is real. So whose notion of reality is right? Is it your notion of reality that is the capital R? Is it mine? Do we compromise? What's the right way of thinking about these things? And there are actually different kinds of realities, There's the reality of Gauss-Bonnet. Here's the mathematical reality. Here's what it is, the integral. Yes, exactly right. It's a math talk. I'm not sure if you guys know that. The integral of every point on a surface, the curvature of every point on a surface is equal to 2 pi times the Euler characteristic. That means if you take your surface, you add up every point of curvature, stretch and deform that surface in lots of different ways, the total amount of curvature is going to be fixed. That although the little curvature changes all the time, the big curvature, when you add it all up, when you integrate it, is a constant. It's an amazing thing. Some of you guys right now might be looking at this getting turned on. It's great. I'm excited about that. Some of you might agree with Stephen Colbert when he says, equations are the devil's sentences. So is that the kind of reality we want to talk about? Is everything going to be boiled down to some mathematical truths and what that means, into some equations we can move around? There's also different kinds of realities. There's reality in physics. So here's what Stephen Hawking writes in his most recent book, The Grand Design. He writes, "The universe does not have a single existence or history, but rather every possible version of the universe exists simultaneously." That means right now, every choice that you could make at this second and that I could make at this second, all of those possibilities are existing, and we're only living in one slice of that reality. Is that what it is? This notion of the multiverse, is that what reality is that we can actually talk about and understand and exist in? My friends, for thousands of years, the notion of truth and reality has always been linked to this notion of a God. And today in 21st century America, reality is no longer measured by church or holy days. Belief in religion, in some sense, seems no longer relevant. It seems like a scaffolding. You just need religion to hold things in place until you figure out what the truth is, and then you can take that scaffolding off, right? It's just there till you understand what's really going on. This is best expressed by this quote by Michio Kaku, who talks about and rephrases a quote by Arthur C. Clarke. He says, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from divinity." So if you don't understand something and you attribute it to God, just wait. Just wait. It'll happen. We'll figure it out, and your need for God is no longer there. It's amazing that science is the new measure of reality in many ways. Black is the new white. Science is the new God. And the question is, how did we get this way? So let me just step back and I just want you guys to see things a little bit from my perspective on how this happened. I love the Renaissance era. Right? During the time of the Renaissance, art and music and math and science and literature all worked together. We had faith and reason and beauty, and this resulted in paintings and cathedrals and inventions and poems. It was beautiful. And after this, a time of the Enlightenment came, around 1750. So the Enlightenment says the following thing, that the reason must be advocated as the primary source of authority. Look, you just cannot go around and tell me the sun is in the center of the solar system. You must prove it. You just can't say, I believe it in faith. Give me some evidence. Convince me through reason that this is true. Ideas must be tested, measured, evaluated, and not just accepted. My friends, I'm a huge fan of the Enlightenment era. I love it. It gives me a job. That's what I do as a mathematician, right? It's a major force for progress, for understanding how the world works, better cars, better medicine, better transportation, better ice cream. Everything is improved because of the Enlightenment era. But unfortunately, I think it's been taken to an extreme. So let me just try to explain this. I think now we try to explain everything through science. And it's probably best explained through this quote by Bertrand Russell, mathematician and philosopher superstar. And he writes this, whatever knowledge is attainable, what must be attained by scientific methods, and what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. It is only through the eyes of science that these things are going to happen. You see, we're putting all our chips in the science bucket. Now, there's one major cause of this concept in the Enlightenment, which is this notion of a dualism. So let me give you an example of what I mean by dualism, right? So here we see what I think of in the Renaissance era. On one side, we have art and math, right? Fitting together. There's faith and reason. There's religion and politics. There's the unmeasurable and the measurable. Let me just pause and say one thing about this religion and politics thing. What I mean by religion is our answers to the big questions, like who we are, how things happen. And politics is our answer to the daily questions about laws, about divorce laws, about speeding tickets. And of course, the way we think about the big picture is gonna affect the way we think about our everyday stuff. So it did fit together. Now, the Enlightenment era came, and it didn't say you have to pick one or the other one. It actually says you have to pick one versus the other one, right? On this one side, you have this art major at Northwestern, kind, elegant, artistic, and loving. Right? On this other side, versus the art major, is the math major, cold, calculating, hard, but sexy in their own way. You know what I'm saying? You see, what I want to do is I don't want to sterilize this world. I don't want to cut the world up into pieces and say this is the math bucket, and this is the art bucket, and this is the science bucket. See, I want to deal with everything together. I want to deal with all of the mess. I love mess. So let me just give you some examples of messy things that I love. This is Grader's ice cream. I'm not sure if you know about Grader's, but it started in Cincinnati, some places in Columbus. This is black raspberry chip. The chocolate chips are huge and soft. You bite into it, it doesn't hurt your teeth. It melts in your mouth because it has so much fat. It's incredible. Here's something else that's messy that I love. Sex, dating, relationships, marriage, all of that stuff that is so hard and disgusting and yet glorious. It's this messiness of being with one another. And here's a result of sex. This is my family. Right? So let me just say, yeah, it sounds great, right? Whatever. But let me just go through this picture in a little bit. So the first thing you will notice is that my wife does not look like me, right? She's not Indian. So already we have some problems right there, right? One of the advice my wife would give you is the goal of marriage in many ways is to minimize pain in life. And if you marry somebody outside your race, life is going to be more painful, right? So that's a messy world that we have. And if you think that's tough, then we have these two on the right, the one on the left, right? What's their identity? They're messed up. You know, what are they? You know, where are they? Are they Indian, Chinese, American, what? And if you think that's crazy, then there's that little one on my lap. So this is my girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, my dream girl. What's she gonna be like? Can you imagine us as parents, these crazy nut jobs as brothers and sisters? But this, my friends, is the mess of life that I adore. I wouldn't trade any of this. Right? How do we handle all of this mess of reality? See, here's what I want. I want a model, I want a theory, I want a story that can handle the full mess of reality. That's what I want. You see, I'm ambitious. I don't want a theory of only the measurable things. I want a theory of everything to handle the big questions such as justice, beauty, relationships, significance. I want everything. Think about this. You know, why does Victoria's Secret not sell clothes using scientific data analysis? They have beautiful, naked women. Because we love physical things. Why do we go to concerts? Why do we watch sports? There's a shared experience that we can think of something that we fit into a bigger realm with other people. Why do we listen to Oprah or have friends listen to Deepak Chopra or music and mysticism? Because we thirst for something bigger. We thirst for meaning. Why do our hearts burn when we watch 12 Years a Slave or watch The Godfather or watch The Matrix? When Neo goes into the metal detector and it goes off and he goes like this and filled with guns? Why? Because we want Morpheus to be set free. We want redemption. We want justice. There's something bigger in us. So which story, which model, which theory best explains all of these hungers in us? The Enlightenment viewpoint says, everything can be understood through science alone. But my friends, I think we're dealing with issues far larger in complexity than Gauss-Bonnet, than black holes, than genetics. Science can't handle it. It is too big. My friends, let me be really careful though, right? I love science. It is a wonderful tool to measure, to find patterns, to make amazing predictions. But science is just one language. You see, it is just one tool in a toolbox of truths. This is why we need others. This is why we need writers. This is why we need philosophers, theologians, musicians, artists to express, to capture, to understand the immensity and complexity of life. You know, I just want to encourage you, if you're an undergrad here at Northwestern, it is an amazing place for an education. And don't have blinders on, so your only goal is to take classes in your major. Right? This is the one chance for you to learn the tools of truth in so many different disciplines. Enjoy it. Pick the major you want. Enjoy it. Love it. Go deep in it, but also go broad in these different things. You have an amazing university to do this in. That's what you should be thinking about, not just this one tool set. My friends, science does not have a monopoly on reason and logic. Science certainly doesn't have a monopoly on truth and reality. And believing that science is the only language of truth, I feel, is an incredible leap of faith. It's as large a leap of faith as a belief in a God. Now, whether you realize it or not, each one of us is living life of faith in something. Here's what David Foster Wallace says in a speech. He says, "There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship." You see, we must put all our chips in some bucket. And if you choose not to pick a viewpoint, that itself is a choice. There is no neutral ground. You're going to be invested in something. What are you invested in? Now, to me, there's no theory, there's no story as satisfying in explaining the world, all of the world, not just the measurable parts, as the Christian story. So let me be clear. I don't believe in the Christian faith because it gives my life meaning or it's emotionally satisfying. I'm a mathematician. I have no emotions to satisfy. You know that. The reason I believe in physics, the existence of forces and particles that I cannot see, the reason I believe in physics is because it best explains the physical world around me. It's not because physics makes me happy or gives me meaning. And the reason I believe in the Christian faith, that this world is broken due to our separation from God, that this God pursued us and wants to bring us back to him, and it's seen in the life and death and resurrection of Christ, that this theory best explains my deep questions, the beautiful mess that I see, and my hunger for justice and beauty in these big things. So I just want to close with sharing why I find this faith compelling. First of all, I think the Christian faith is not theoretical. It's not philosophical. It's not metaphysical. In a lot of ways, it's grounded in history. Right? The Judeo-Christian faith has these historical claims as to what that faith is about how the way God intersected this world and took care of his people. And to me, it culminates in this amazing statement about the resurrection of Christ. Now, this resurrection about this guy who died thousands of years ago, it's a linchpin to this faith. You can't use the tools of science, but you can bear on it the tools of history. You can test and to see whether this claim holds. I'm convinced they do. That's why my chips are in that bucket. And unlike any system of beliefs I know of, this Judeo-Christian faith, it boldly claims that this mess that we see is built into the very heart of God. This is why God is called Emmanuel, God with us in this mess, in this pain. This mess is central to this story. Now, the death of Jesus shows that God does not accept this broken world, that pain and justice are given a solution here. Now many of you might think that, love, the God of love and the God of wrath don't fit together at all. but I think they fit perfectly together, and I'll tell you why. If I have my baby girl that you saw, and if somebody's hurting that girl, there will be wrath in my heart. And I would want justice to happen, and the world set right, and her to be set right. You see, the opposite of love is not wrath. The opposite of love is indifference, if I don't care what happens to my daughter. And at the cross, I see that this God is not indifferent. He pours the wrath on his son due to his love for us. It's an amazing thing that in this death, God actually shares the responsibility with us. Blows me away. And the resurrection of Jesus, this resurrection, it's not a spiritual ghost of a resurrection, but it's a flesh and blood resurrection, which means it says that the physical world matters. Flesh matters, sex matters, ice cream matters, earth matters. This beautiful world will not be tossed aside. So what does this afterlife, this new heaven and the new earth look like to me? It looks like this. It looks like artists and musicians hanging out, about inventors, academics, people who make more amazing ice cream, fashion designers, shoes that are better than these. It's all of these things put together. It's going to be an amazing world full of excitement. It's not about doing good deeds to get to heaven to sing songs to a magical God. Oh my goodness, dear Lord, no way. But it is a beautiful world that will be set right. It is this world that will be redeemed and set right. It is the way the world should be. And when I practice this Christian faith, it frees me. It frees me from brokenness, offers me a sense of true acceptance, and I see actually in my life more forgiveness, more peace, more love, more understanding, a wisdom to live life well. So I've said enough. Let me just close with a quote that I love. It's a quote from one of my favorite books, The Princess Bride. And it goes like this: life is pain. Anyone that says different is selling something. And what I mean by that is, there are no quick answers. There's nothing that we as friends and colleagues at this stage are going to say that's going to make your life easy, that's going to make a clear slam dunk case for anything. But I encourage you to just listen to us, to think about it, to wrestle with it yourselves, to talk to one another, and don't be afraid to get messy. Thank you for your time.
Testing. Can you hear me? Because I have a lot of things, electronics. I have my cell phone. I have this mic. I have that mic. I have my jawbone, and I don't want to get electrocuted. I was afraid from the water. So my job is really to react to Satyan. And first of all, I'm glad I hired you. And did you get tenure when I was president? Or? Well, a little shout out for that, buddy. Come on. Anyway, I love listening to you, and I really learned a lot. Three things came to mind, because I think Axel's job and my job was to react to what you said. I don't think we were supposed to come up with anything original. I haven't come up with anything original in about 20 years, so trust me, it's not going to happen tonight. Three quick thoughts. The first one, a week ago today, I was in Israel. My wife Mimi's there. We had two of our children, my mother-in-law, 88 years old, and with a whole bunch of friends and administrators from Northwestern. We had a large group, and as I told you at dinner, I've been going to Israel for many, many years, right? And I don't usually do the Christian, the Stations of the Cross and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and things, unless I'm with Christians who had never been there before. And I knew it would be meaningful. So we were there, we were in Jerusalem a week ago Saturday. And, a couple of people, Patricia Teaservan, some of you know, Vice President for Student Affairs, and Al Cubbage, Vice President for Public Information, a couple of others, very serious Christians of faith. So we went with them, actually, and to see them in their eyes when they're there in Calvary, and they're there in the Christ's tomb, and then the slab where they put him after they took him off, and to see the tears and to see the devotion and the faith, brought me to tears. And I would be honored to be there with you and your dad one day. So that was the first thing that came to mind, is that one of the things I love about Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, is that there's something for everyone. If there are any Muslims there, you go to the Dome of the Rock, and obviously for Christians and for Jews, there's no place like the Holy Land. And it's something we should all pray for. Trust me, we should all pray for. So that was the first thing. The second thing, I was thinking, one thing I always liked about you was, in addition to being a great scholar and a teacher, you're a person of faith. And I've always felt really comfortable with people of faith, whether they're Jews, observant Jews as I am or any other faith. And I still believe that. I actually do have friends who, for whom faith has no role in their life and in their identity, very unlike myself. But I've always felt there's sort of a comfort about that. And in the beginning, I sort of fell into the sort of trap that if you're of faith, then you're naturally attracted to anybody of faith. I don't know if any of you ever think about that. And that it's sort of easy because, you believe in certain things that are very common. And I think later, Bill, we're going to talk about universal truths, and I think Axel might talk about that as well. But it wasn't until I actually got here 5 years ago. And I got here 5 years ago, and one of the first things I did was I organized a lunch with local clergy. And Michael, you weren't there yet, but Tim, you were there, our chaplain. We had people, Catholic priests and Protestant ministers and a couple of rabbis. I don't think anyone from a Muslim faith at the time. But we had a wonderful thing, and I got them all together, and I said, well, let's introduce ourselves. And you can probably guess what they did. So the first person came and they said, well, this is First Baptist Church, and I want to tell you we have a food kitchen, and I want to tell you we volunteer. And they were all talking about their public service stuff, and it was great stuff. And they all went around from there, and there were about 14 or 15 of them. And every single one talked about what Jews call tikkun olam, healing the world. Just like you said, healing a broken world. And it was really beautiful, and it was really inspiring. And it got to me, and I said, it's kind of curious. I love to hear that. I think as 16th president of Northwestern, we'd love to help you with your soup kitchens, and we'd love to help you with caring for the elderly, and, we'd love to do that. But, I brought you here to talk about God. And they were like, are you kidding me? So it was like, it just never occurred to me that they thought that I brought them all together to talk about community service, as important as it is. I'm a person of faith. I just kind of felt, hey, this is good. I'm the president. Maybe I can get all these people together, and we could just talk about God, And then we went around the room again, and it was really very interesting. And they said, wow, this is like amazing. How did you ever get to be president of a secular university? Did you tell them? And I said, well, I don't know. I know I observe Shabbat. Where do I go? I go to shul every week. And I keep kosher. I guess they knew certain kinds of things, but maybe they didn't know. I didn't feel like it was a deep, dark secret I needed to tell the board of trustees and the faculty on the search committee at Northwestern that I'm a person of faith. But, we went around, and that was really interesting. But then I got challenged in a really wonderful way. There was one person, I won't tell you which Christian faith, and he said to me, this is a really shocking conversation. I'm really shocked to be here at Northwestern and talk about God, and to have a president of this great secular university saying it's the most important thing that defines him as a human being. And I really love that, and I really respect you. But I think the conversation's too simple, as many interfaith conversations are. Because you just talk about, well, we all believe in some version of the Ten Commandments and the Golden Rule and all the easy kinds of things. So he said, because that's all true, but I have to tell you, Mort, I have to tell you that in my heart, he said, I have to tell you that, as someone really of faith, not just somebody who talks about faith, I have to tell you, you have the wrong faith. And he went on to say, it sounds funny, and he said something. He said, because you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, in my faith, and I believe to my heart and soul, that when you die, you're going to go to hell. And I paused. I was a little taken back, and I said, well, that's a kind of an interesting thing to say. And then, it was really the first time I started thinking that, you know what? I think you're wrong too. And that's the thing about interfaith, right? When you really, if you're just a little bit of faith, and if you believe in God and you're a good person, I'm past that. I'm an observant Jew, and I love you, and I really do, and I respect what you say, and I love the ending, but it's not my faith. So that's the interesting thing when I listen to you, and it really opened my eyes, because when I told Mimi that, she was first like, oh my God, is that what he really said? And some people went, ooh, ooh. But at the end of the day, I had to say, I agree with him. I don't necessarily think he's going to hell, but, I don't believe the Messiah is coming. That's an important difference. Duh, right? So that's something that I think about. And as much as I loved what you said at the end, It's not my faith. And then the last thing I want to quickly say is that, it's Pesach, it's Passover coming on Monday and Tuesday of next week. And we'll have Seders for 64 each night in the president's house. I don't know if any of you are coming. It tends to be more than half, actually, non-Jewish who come to our house. And I tell the whole story, and we do the whole Seder, if anybody's ever been to a Seder. And, obviously you tell the story of the Exodus, right, from the Hebrew Bible, of the Jewish slaves from Egypt. And, you tell the whole story. And one of the things I just love about Exodus is when Moses, the whole story of Moses, played by Charlton Heston. First of all, Steve Colbert's class of '86, so go easy on Steve there. And then secondly, Charlton Heston's class of '45, and he played Moses, so there. Anyway, so, there's a thing, and it's in the movie too, Yul Brynner, the whole thing, Charlton Heston, he's out there, and, he slays the guy, he's in the basket from a kid, the whole story, right? I think almost everybody in this audience is familiar with the Hebrew Bible, right? And, he's wandering in the desert. He has a family. This is 1300 BCE, so it was a really long time ago. And, maybe there's some science fact about it. Maybe there isn't. That might come up later, Bill. I don't care. I really don't care if it happened or not. For me, you act as if it did. And I have zero interest in the history about did they find things, did they not. And David Opie, who's a wonderful rabbi, just did this whole thing that you should do Pesach even if I'm sure Michael knows, even if it didn't exist and somebody else just wrote a thing it might have, and the whole thing. Anyway, so Moses is in the desert and he sees a fire, which isn't unusual, of course, in the heat of a desert, right? So he's there and he sees it and he's he doesn't make a big thing, but he sees that the bush is not consumed by the flame. It's the burning bush. And he walks up to it and he hears Moses, Moses, the voice of God. And, that's a moment where, I think about that a lot. And I think about it maybe not in the context that all of a sudden you hear voices and God speaks to you or anything. But I think of a wonderful expression that in Hebrew is da lifnei mi ata omed, which means know before whom you stand. And in many synagogues over the Ark where you have the Ten Commandments, right? And you have 10 commandments, so often on top, and you have the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, and it says that, da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. And that's something I tell people all the time. And I say to ask that question, who do you, before whom you stand? And I think some people, it's God and their faith, and other ones is trying to be a good person, and it's their grandmother, or it's their second grade teacher, or it's their, little league coach or something. But I think that's a question that really does transcend whether you have a faith or which faith it is. But I think everyone stands before someone. And just as you said, Satyan, so beautifully, you make decisions and you're trying to be grounded and you try to do the right thing. But I always think about that. And, for I think many people in this crowd, it's God, it's Jesus. For me, it's God, a different God than yours, but it's God. And then for people who don't have faith, and there's other ways they could survive and thrive and be happy and be good people. It's somebody else in their life. So I always think about that, and I tell my students, regardless of faith, when we have these kinds of discussions, that always think about when you're making the key decisions in your life, who is it looking over your shoulder? And for me, it's my mother, it's my maternal grandfather, and it's God. So it's a little different. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I have prepared something, so I hope it's not going to be too long. And I'm the often mentioned person who is, I'm just incapable of adhering to any faith because I'm incompetent, because I was raised without any notion of religion. So, and I never felt any need for it, but I never felt bad for it either. So but I agree with Satyan's feeling. I love the mess in the world and I love complexity. And I think dealing with complexity is one of the most challenging tasks from the environment, from many other things. And dealing with diversity and plurality in society is also one part of that. And for me, somehow that's all of a piece. And that piece I call, for lack of a better word, nature. And all those messy things, for me, are part of nature. And I was announced as a naturalistic person, whatever. This, I want to clarify from the beginning before I begin to read a couple of notes that I have. When I speak of nature, I take the whole shebang, including human behavior, its complexity, human judgment, and so on and so forth, which for me are aspects of the natural existence of the evolved species human being with the intellectual and other tools that we have acquired in this long process of development. So yeah, mess is great, but mess is not always good to us, so we try to deal with it. We were asked three questions in this, to answer three questions in this forum, and the third question was what I personally regard as the ultimate source of truth and why. And I think it's a good thing to begin with that, continuing what I said already, because it's a little bit different from what Morty and Satyan have said. I want to use that as kind of like giving you the lowdown of what I will have to say, and also a little bit indicating what I can't say because of time, not because I wouldn't blabber on. So I think there are simply overwhelmingly good arguments for the view that our only source of truth is the cooperative search for the truth in all the varieties of an open-ended public process of learning from experience and from others, and learning that the variety of domains requires in which we need to find cognitive responses. There is, to my mind, no one method that fits all those domains, and I am skeptical about reductionist promises from the point of view of a philosopher of science and methodologist that say all the science is either reducible to physics or else it's not science. I think that's just not defensible. I also don't believe in the separability of facts and values in empirical knowledge. Here is an example. Every finite set of data is compatible with many different explanatory theories, and selecting among them requires, because all the facts are already in, it can't be done by the facts themselves, so it requires judgments that are guided by standards, norms, and agreed to plausibility measures and error theories and so on and so forth. So doing good science means engaging in and negotiating norms as well. It's not just reducing everything to causes or something like that. Science is itself eminently human and normative, and this includes the natural sciences. In spite of my methodological pluralism, I believe there are common norms that all empirical science follow when they have a legitimate claim to objectivity. The pursuit of truth guided by these norms is the job of all the academic endeavors at a university if the results of these endeavors can have a claim on everyone. So that's the point here, universality. No matter what else they may believe, what religion they happen to adhere to, what attitudes to the results they may find agreeable, because we may find out things that we actually would like to be otherwise. And that this liking to be otherwise is not a sufficient reason to start a new research program. Goes without saying. The neutrality with regard to the latter attitudes is, as far as I can see, an internal consequence of the conditions under which we can rationally expect our learning processes to be tracking the truth and the truth alone, and thereby to enable us to get a grip on the facts. Now, when I say neutrality, I know that Satyan was skeptical, or at least hesitant about this. This is what I mean. This neutrality is ensured in the following way. Our best procedures or methods to attain factual truths and to keep tracking truths wherever we need the information and knowledge afforded by them to solve the problems we sense are themselves, these methods are themselves subject to constant improvement, revision, and adaptation to new subject matters and mistaken wrong starts, false priorities, and so on and so forth. So in other words, we get rid of bias. The norms of inquiry, they realize, and these are the 4 norms that all empirical sciences that can call themselves that, I think, must realize. They're self-correcting, open-ended, information-sensitive, and argument-based learning processes from experience in publicly accessible environments. And I believe that science is, as it were, the same thing as normal learning processes that we go through and that are indispensable for anything that we do, just on steroids. So it's learning as we know it, just on steroids. And what are these steroids? Well, these steroids are called reason in some philosophical worldviews. I would call it method or methodical, regulated, self-controlled research. So, and the one thing that is extremely important about science is that it is self-correcting, because that is crucial for our appreciation of science as, I would call it, an objectivity tool. It means that if there is evidence that science does not do what it is supposed to do in a domain, track the truth, issue information, allow us to predict, control, and explain the phenomena in this domain, if it licenses us suddenly to believe things that turn out to be unsupported by the available reasons or turn out to be false. So if scientific methods do all this and they mislead us, then science is to be, by its own standards, self-critical. So I said before that the only source of truth are the multifarious learning processes we are subject to when we respond to information coming to us while we interact with others and the world. As opposed to natural learning processes, science is simply a conscious and methodical self-controlled exercise of critical intelligence, but otherwise not different in kind. Science is thus best understood as the disciplined exercise of the same abilities that occur in natural learning processes. This is why we trust the results of science when it is well done, even more than our own learning processes as they naturally occur to us. When we don't know from the point of view of our own natural learning processes, we turn to the scientists as helping us out, giving us a hand, giving us authoritative information about things we need to know the facts about. As long as other methods of fixing beliefs don't measure up to the same critical standards of learning from experience and the integration of all relevant evidence and consideration of alternatives, the results simply deserve less trust. I'm not saying that they're ruled out, but they're not automatically trustworthy, as it were. If the pursuit of empirical knowledge is our aim, as well as with all other purposes we have, only the best is good enough. And this is what gives science its authority. Now, I want to speak to the question of, is there an objective truth? Because uncharacteristically for a philosopher, maybe, I believe there is. And I believe there is such a thing even not only for the theoretical realm, but I also believe that there is some such thing as what I would call unconditional oughts. I can't argue this, too much time. No, that's the only reason. I mean, otherwise I would tell you. But, so unconditional oughts may be what was previously indicated by Morty as what we find, so like in these trivial discussions, you know, like where everybody shares, like, yeah, you shouldn't kill. Yeah, right, that kind of sounds right. And stealing is wrong too, and a couple of other things. Cruelty is bad. Those things I think that we can make very good arguments that are exactly parallel to the scientific examination of claims regarding facts, so that we can see that we exercise the same learning capabilities with regard to finding out whether or not there is a fact of the matter about certain moral judgments that we have. It can turn out there isn't, because we can't bring enough reasons. But it can turn out there might, or for all we know, there is. So I believe objectivity is ill understood if it's restricted to, say, the statement of physical truths, as I already said. Objectivity. My working definition of the objectivity in this context is that a belief that something is true, of which we have reason to accept, it is objectively justified when, no matter which perspective we occupy, no relevant reasons against the belief tip the balance in its disfavor. Objective justification is thus predicated on perspective independence or the absence of bias. That does not mean that we could access the belief, as it were, out of the void or in detachment from what else we believe or what idiosyncratic reasons may have led us up to the belief. There are scores of stories about scientists who dream up theories, or who are jogging on the beach and see a wave, and suddenly an analogy makes it click. So all this is how we get to the belief. What leads us up to the belief, biographical reasons, as it were. What the absence of bias means is that these particularities of perspective don't play a relevant role in warranting the assertion of the result as fact. This is what is meant when we say that scientifically established results are neutral between particular backgrounds of belief. The facts discerned in objectivity conferring justification practices thus matter to everyone equally. The results of scientific inquiry are geared to informing us that something is so and not else, no matter what else we may happen to believe. This hints at another connotation of objective that I want to stress, namely that objectively justified assertions are presumed to be true independent of our will, just like their subject matters are so independent of our will. Now, there is an interesting relationship between truth and objectivity, but I think I'm going to skip that part because that's very technical. I think I have said already enough about truth and objectivity. But one question that everybody asks and that all of us have been asking is also something that the methodologist is interested in, namely, given that we know more or less what truth is, namely it has to do something with things we think being so in the world, then it's true, how do we know? Now that's exactly where objectivity comes into play. We are entitled to regard a hypothesis as true for all we know when the reasons favoring accepting it outweigh the reasons favoring alternatives that are incompatible with it. Each of the hypotheses is a truth candidate, and scientific inquiry is the process by which we methodically and critically select among them the one we ought to place our bets on in light of what we know. Such a procedure, and that's the point, is only reliable when we use everything we can get our hands on that could be relevant to evaluating the hypothesis set. Information that supports as well as information that weakens our confidence for our pet hypothesis in light of the alternatives. This is how we minimize bias, as it were, on a daily basis, doing science, considering all the relevant information. Objectivity, in the sense of impartiality, is thus the norm that enables regarding the process of inquiry as truth-conducive and hence fact-providing as possible. And having said this, we can see another crucial connection, the connection between objectivity and publicity. That will allow me then to come to the relationship between religion and science. as I reconstructed here. For the same reason that we disregard the origin of evidentially relevant information, we have to maximize the audience involved in inquiry. This means that all the information needs to be accessible to everyone equally, but above all, it means that given that this is so, everything provided to the information pool is, as everyone else has access to it, equally subject to universal scrutiny. Here we have universal again. Now, it's universal entitlement to critically examine any whatever belief that is put out there to be reflected upon. Knowledge not only needs to be public, it also needs to be shared by allowing everyone to examine whether it survives their critical objections. Objectivity put into practice means unrestricted, critical public scrutiny of beliefs in light of any objections coming forward from experience, alternatives, or from other people. No one entering the sphere of knowledge claims can exempt their claims from scrutiny when relevant information is available that favors a contrary hypothesis. Whatever survives this process of public scrutiny, and only it, is what I would call a mandatory assertion or belief. If so, and science has the authority as described, this feeds the information to all of us as established knowledge. By the same token, it also, and that's something that connects publicity and the normativity of science with the normativity of our everyday lives in a free society. It feeds the information to all of us as established knowledge and puts everyone, including the lay public, in the same position as the scientists, namely to be entitled, maybe not capable, but to be entitled to criticize a claim when and only insofar as one has relevant information that has not been contemplated in the relevant research program. Typical case is an implementation. Okay, implementation of a model that was developed by the best scientists in the world, all Nobel Prize winners and so on and so forth, and they say, okay, yeah, we are going to solve the problems of the economy with that, say. And then, turns out, bubble, explodes, crisis, everything goes wrong. Now, what goes wrong is not necessarily what the economists didn't know. Maybe the economists didn't know, or some economists knew. What goes wrong is the prediction of prosperity. And the prediction of prosperity is checked by the misery of the people to whom that model was applied. So that's how people contest and can contest science, when and only when they have the relevant reasons. One other thing that I wanted to say is that in light of the fact of the public learning processes which I'm describing science as characteristic of it, it is in this sense the epitome of an egalitarian and free democratic organization of people around a common goal, namely the search for truth, which is important because we need facts for any whatever purpose that we want to realize. Now, the reference to the publicity constraint allows me to turn to the question of the relationship between scientifically established facts and religious belief of faith-based knowledge claims. And here is probably where we most differ in our point of view. When we contrast, but actually maybe not. I mean, I didn't feel, at least with what Morty said, that I would disagree in principle. When we contrast faith and knowledge, what is meant is usually that faith in one way or another constitutes what religious scientist Joseph Bishop calls a doxastic venture. Now that's one of those fancy philosophical terms they wanted to use. Doxastic venture, an often conscious decision to adopt or hold on to a belief in spite of available evidence or without evidence. And sometimes this serves the function, a very important function sometimes for certain projects, of enabling acting towards an uncertain future as taking up what William James called a credit of belief, One adopts a perspective, takes a stand, ventures a belief, and dependent on this venture, acts as if what the belief says were the case. Now, if one remains there, then it's just wishful thinking. That's what the scientist says. If this contrast between faith and scientific results captures some of the reality of faith, and as I said, I wouldn't be able to tell, but I hope, then it is clear that faith-based assertions enjoy a different standing from assertions issued in the scientific process. While the individual undertaking the venture may be permitted to rationally adopt the belief if it doesn't conflict with any scientifically established results, and while the venture and action pursued in it may entail the assumption that what is posited is a fact, the belief is treated analogous to a truth claim. The entitlement to the belief is markedly different. As a venture, the belief is not adopted because it has withstood public criticism, and insofar as one holds on to it, no matter what, is also held immune to public criticism. It is also, in light of the diversity of religious perspectives into which it potentially cannot be integrated, and of the presence of non-theistic, a-religious members of the audience of justification, it's not prima facie universalizable. So the problem for religious beliefs, as it were, might not actually be a problem, because it could be just the decision to privately follow a precept and not let it interfere with public, as it were, affairs. I have a couple of things about interreligious relations to say too, although I'm totally incompetent, as I said, because probably I haven't had, well, I've had a couple of them. But the fact is, I think if we ask what the university should do is, let me put it like this, in the words of a revered philosopher of science that I like very much, Elliot Sober, who said, the university should also be a place for theology among consenting adults. And I think that's fine.